All right, let's bring John into the conversation here. And there's a lot of talk here, John, in Tim's piece, suggesting that Jeffrey Lurie has a lot more involvement in the Eagles than maybe it's set out there in print or in reality here. But I don't know that this means a lot if he's been doing it all the time anyway. But we certainly don't have the view that Jeffrey Lurie is one of these hands-on, crowding type of owners.
No, I've never gotten that from him. I mean, he'll come out to the practice field and he'll watch more than occasionally. So he's into it. He admits he's into it. And he said he's obsessed with it. So he is a guy who's going to take an interest in the product. As far as forcing people to go in certain directions, there was some speculation early that he was taking a bigger role in the organization after the Chip Kelly fiasco. But I think now that everything's back in sort of a normal mode and they brought Joe Douglas in on the personnel side, I think he's taken a step back. So I think he's an owner who likes football. And he mentioned, and it was clear to mention when he talked about those comments as well, that he's always done that. He's always met with his head coach. So, I think it's the perception of Doug Pederson, and we know people are kind of trying to uncover rocks because of Mike Lombardi's comments. It's sort of like one thing befalls the other, and people are looking for the unpreparedness, the whatever you want to call it, that Mike Lombardi was speaking of, and the fact that you have maybe a head coach who doesn't have a tremendous amount of power, being painted in a certain direction. But as I often point out, that he's not the only head coach in this league. The traditional setup for years and years and years is, owner, general manager on the football side, coach. So it's not like Doug Peterson's the only coach in football history that has given players and said, go coach them. I mean, that's been the traditional setup. It's only in recent years, in this generation, where you've sort of gone to more coaches with omnipotent power on the football side.
Yeah, I guess the take from this would be it just adds more fuel to the fire that Peterson's kind of a yes man.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's the perception of a lot of people, and that he's willing to accept everything to be a head coach in this league. But we're in a city that's not used to that traditional setup because Andy Reid had a ton of power and Chip Kelly forged his way into a ton of power. So I think even for the people covering the team, they're used to a certain type of head coach. And this is a different type of head coach. Whereas, I can point all around the league of similar head coaches who, again, they're given the groceries, as Bill Parcells would say, and then you got to cook the meal. But it's not as rare as people think it is.
John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com. All right, let's take a little look into this game here. The Eagles and the Chiefs, of course. We talked a little bit about this yesterday. Both 1-0, both look pretty impressive. Obviously, the Chiefs look really impressive because they go to New England and win. But don't you feel that people think that the Chiefs just are a superior team right now? Do you get that feeling that people just look at the Chiefs as a better team? And I guess my question is that because of Andy Reid against Doug Peterson? More so than the talent on the roster?
Well, I think it's both. I think people think Andy's a better coach than Doug Peterson, but this is also, this is a team that won 12 games last year. They're pretty good. They have a lot of talent. And they've been basically, except for 1 year, a playoff team every year Andy's been there. So they've been pretty successful for a while, winning the AFC West last year, as I said, with 12 wins. It's a very difficult place to play, one of the 2 or 3 loudest buildings in the NFL, Arrowhead Stadium. So you put all that into the equation. Generally, if you're a 7-9 team trying to take the next step, people aren't going to expect you to go into Arrowhead Stadium against a 12-win team and come out on the positive side of the spectrum. And I don't think you're just saying because Doug Pederson. I think if you flip the talent and Tyreek Hill's on this side and Justin Houston's on this side, well, people might think of it a little bit differently.
The injury situation, it looks like the Eagles are pretty good in this one other than Darby, so they're in a good spot with that. So we know pretty much at full blast. Have you got a clearer picture of what the cornerback situation will look like now that they have a full week of practice?
Well, I think it's going to be Jalen Watkins, similar to the second half against the Washington Redskins. No one's letting on because they want to keep that veil of secrecy and don't let the Chiefs know if they don't have to. But there's a couple things for that. A, it worked last week. B, Corey Graham is dealing with a hamstring injury, and he's questionable. And C, the slot guy a lot of the time is going to be Hill. So that's not a good matchup for Malcolm Jenkins. You'd rather have the smaller, quicker guy, Patrick Robinson, on that type of receiver in the slot. So I think all of those things kind of lean you towards the fact that they want Robinson in the slot, and if they want Robinson in the slot, that means it's got to be Jalen Watkins or Rasul Douglas on the outside. I think they'll let Watkins play because he played well last week, and if he falters early, then they maybe give Rasul a chance. But I think that's the way they'll at least start.
John, we've had a lot of dialogue about the teacher and the pupil, or the student and the teacher, and Doug and Andy Reid going up against each other. Do you get the sense that Doug Pederson is excited about facing Andy Reid?
Yeah, I think they're both excited. I think they both have a lot of respect for each other, and they both would like to beat each other. I think that's, in a competitive game like this, in a competitive situation, and from Doug's standpoint, Andy is that larger-than-life figure who was his mentor and his coach, and is so highly regarded in the NFL. So if you're able to go into Kansas City, as I said, in that kind of environment and pull off an upset, well, all of a sudden that's a big feather in his cap. So I think he sees it as a good opportunity. It's a good litmus test for his team. So, I think coaches are always excited to play every game because you only get one a week. But, there's more to it because those two basically had a history dating back 2 decades. So they want to do well against each other.
Is Doug doing more with the defense since he knows a lot about KC and the Chiefs offense? I know he was asked an interesting question regarding his involvement with the defense. Normally the head coach would just let the defensive coordinator handle the defense, but in this case, he has that knowledge.
Yeah, because there's he mentioned he probably had a few more conversations with Jim Schwartz this week than normal, but I don't even think that's a necessity because the two offenses are so similar as far as personnel groupings and formations. They do a lot of the same things as far as lining up, as far as misdirection, as trying to fool the opposing defense. So in a lot of ways, the Eagles already know because they practice against it basically every day. That will help them, but it'll also help the other side. So it depends how you look at it, and it generally comes down to execution. We all understand that. And there are some differences, as Jalen Mills told me, while they do use the similar, as I said, formations and personnel groupings, they're different types of players. The Eagles obviously don't have a Tyreek Hill type. The Chiefs don't have an Alshon Jeffrey type, or even for that matter, a Torrey Smith type. So it's different skill sets to the players, but you're going to see a lot of familiar looks as far as the formations go.
Hey, John, I know all Eagles fans would like to see them, or most Eagles fans would like to see them run the ball more. Is this the week where running the ball would be a good idea? I mean, how are the Chiefs up against the run?
Well, the Chiefs are very good defensively to begin with, and it's a good week to run the ball every week, but you got to be realistic about it. And there's a couple things. I mean, this is a pass-first league, number one. So just about everybody is going to lean towards the pass, not just Doug Pederson, but more so. I think we have a large enough sample size now to understand, and I think it's fair to say, that if it comes down to it, Doug's going to go to the passing game. He likes to pass the football. So we can talk about the run game all we want. I would love to see better balance, but you also have to realize this is not 1985, too. It's a different game today. You're never going to go back to a running back carrying it 30 times and something of that nature. It's just not going to happen. So I think it depends how you look at it.
Yeah. Did you get a chance at all to talk to maybe Wendell Smallwood this week? And, did he seem like he was a little, I don't know, blindsided or taken back by his lack of involvement in the offense?
No, I don't think. I did speak to him this week. No, he didn't seem blindsided at all. I always felt that it was going to start out, and I said it on the show a number of times, it was going to start out as LeGarrette as the main back. And I think as time wears on, especially if he doesn't have a lot of success, I think you'll start to see more Wendell Smallwood. And I think he was clued into that. His main role right now is as the kickoff returner and sort of the backup to LeGarrette Blount. I think he knew that going in, so it certainly didn't surprise him that he didn't get more touches or anything of that nature.
John, what's your read on LeGarrette Blount been so far? Comes from a Super Bowl team, scored 18 touchdowns last year. What's his take? Does he look amused, surprised when this flock of media crowds around his locker, or does it look like it's no big deal to him? And how does he think the running game gets established this week?
Well, I mean, LeGarrette is sort of a cliche guy. Like, you're not going to get a lot out of him. He'll always go to sort of the Bull Durham route, and he's just going to give you the basic answers. And you can tell he's been through it before. Obviously, he's been in very, very high-profile situations. One thing I've tried to get out of him, obviously, being on the Super Bowl champions, he understands what a winning locker room is and what it looks like and how this compares, and he generally never answers, which is understandable. But he is what he is. He's a big back. He's not the most explosive guy in the world. And even you'll see by the nature of New England won a Super Bowl with him scoring 18 touchdowns, but they weren't bending over backwards to bring him back because there's a limited ceiling. But I'll just say he's better than what the Eagles had last year, and he's more, I think, reliable, certainly in short yardage situations. And by the way, even though the numbers weren't all that impressive in Washington, I think the effectiveness and his ability to at least move the ball a little bit did help out. So I think it is an improvement.
John, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask about the kicker because it's me, right? There's a new kicker, Jake Elliott. What's he look like? And what was the conversation that took place today with Doug about a new kicker for Sunday at Arrowhead Stadium?
Yeah, I mean, well, as far as Doug, it basically the question was, do you have as much confidence in Jake Elliott as you would have in Caleb Sturgis? And, of course, he said yes, but the reality is probably not. As a rookie kicker who's never kicked in a real NFL game to this point and going in that type of environment, which you mentioned that can be difficult, not only because of the noise, but the winds, and they tend to swirl there at times depending on the weather. But that shouldn't be an issue, obviously, this early. just in general, you can't count on rookies as much as veterans at that position. But what else is Doug going to say? That's his kicker. He's got to go with him. And generally, you can't change much of your decision making. Maybe if it's 4th and 1 and you might have gave Caleb a chance, you might decide to go for it, something of that nature. But we're all going to see what Jake Elliott is. He was the highest drafted kicker in the league this year, but he got cut by the Bengals. He's a very small kid. It's almost weird to see him because he's smaller than Donnell Pumphrey.
Wow.
And he's got this leg that just the ball just jumps off of. And it's amazing how strong his leg is in such a small package. But his issue with Cincinnati this summer was accuracy. I think he was 4 of 7 in the preseason. So he's got the leg. The question is he going to be consistent enough?
Yeah.
What's the deal with Pumphrey, by the way? He's on the injured reserve. Is he done for the year? What's the story with that?
Yeah, he got put on IR today, tore his hamstring in practice earlier this week. And technically, when you're put on injured reserve during the season, you're not necessarily out for the year because you can bring 2 guys back now. One of them would be Ronald Darby if they put him on IR, but they haven't done that. So you don't have to worry about that issue. But the thing about Pumphrey is he wasn't going to play anyway. So I would think even though this isn't a season-ending injury, he called it a 4 to 6 week injury, I think he's going to stay on IR most likely the rest of the season. He was just not going to play. Even if you had an influx of injuries and say Blount gets hurt, Sproles gets hurt, Smallwood gets hurt, Clement can't play, which is unlikely, they still wouldn't have wanted Donnell Pumphrey. They probably would have wanted somebody off the street. So the question for the Eagles is, do you want him out there practicing when he is healthy? And I think that'll depend on the injury situation as we move forward. If they have to put other guys on injured reserve that they really need back, they're just going to stash them on IR. Maybe if they stay healthy and they want him to practice later in the season when he's healthy to speed up his development, maybe they bring him back, but either way, he's not going to play.
Yeah, no, it seems that I don't know why they were trying to be secretive about it, though, right? Like, okay, this was a way for us to get him, open up another roster spot.
Well, no, I mean he's hurt. You can't fake a torn.
No. We know that. That's the way. We know that he's hurt. It seemed like they were. Once he got hurt, they seemed like they were kind of tiptoeing around it. Like, well, we'll see. No, he's hurt. He's out. We can open up a roster spot now. Yeah.
Well, again, the issue is, and that was what they were wrestling with when they cut to 53. It's like he didn't deserve, let's be honest, he didn't deserve to make the roster from the way he performed in training camp in the preseason. But you're carrying him because you're concerned that he might get picked up on waivers, and you believe down the line he could develop into a good player. So you're sort of carrying him. And the difference between being on the roster and being on injured reserve is you do get to practice, and that's very important for a player like that. But by being on injured reserve, he can't be out there, honing his craft every day. So that could affect him, obviously, going into next year. So it depends a lot on how healthy the Eagles are later in the season.
A lot of good running backs out there in this draft. The Eagles went with one in the 4th round, and it doesn't appear to be working out for them at the moment.
No, but I agree with how Howie Roseman described it when he talked after making the cuts, and everybody wants to make snap judgments. Not all rookies are ready to play right away. You see one who had a very impactful day, a 3rd-round pick in Kansas City. I think it's, I reported way back in the draft the Eagles were trying to get Dalvin Cook, and you saw what he was able to do with Minnesota. They really like Christian McCaffrey, but that wasn't going to get to him at 14. He actually didn't play well in the opener for Carolina. But there's a lot of good rookie running backs. They tried to get some of them, and they went in a different direction. to get Pumphrey. It hasn't worked out early, but that doesn't mean it's not going to work out later.
All right, John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com. Give us your key to the game and your pick for Sunday, Eagles-Chiefs.
Well, I think the key to the game is really the environment and the fact that Arrowhead is such a difficult place to play. And the second part of that is early in the season. I think if you look around the NFL, if you saw last night's game, I feel sorry for you, but you saw the poor offensive line play. That's sort of been the theme. And even here in Philadelphia, where they consider to have a very good offensive line, it struggled in the first game. Why? Because they didn't play a lot in the preseason. They didn't play together. And I think as you get later in the season, you'll see week 5, week 6, you'll see the Eagles start to settle in as having one of the better offensive lines. Early in the season, I think it's going to continue to be a struggle, and you have Justin Houston and Dee Ford coming off the edge. I think in that, where you're a tick slow because of the noise, I think that's going to be very difficult for the Eagles to deal with.
So John likes the Chiefs, close game there at Arrowhead, on the road, Eagles. And, of course, you can listen to the game right here on 97.3 ESPN. And, yes, you are right, that game was painful to watch last night. It got somebody fired in that game. The Bengals have not scored a touchdown yet this year. Their offensive coordinator fired today. John McMullen, more on the Eagles at 97.3 ESPN.com. And, of course, all his national NFL coverage at FanRag Sports NFL. Thanks, pal.
Hey, thank you, guys.